Hi folks, we're going to get the next lightning talk started. This one's from a GreenHopper guru. He's flown over from Sydney to be here for Summit, and he's actually going to share the GreenHopper team's experience in dabbling with Scrum Shock Therapy. So I'd like to welcome James Hatherley.
So, hey everyone, as Nick said, James Hatherley, GreenHopper developer. So last year, our team Scrum Master suggested that we go through Scrum Shock Therapy, which is quite simply a guide for bootstrapping high-performing Scrum teams. So it's based on a paper of the same name by Scott Downey and Jeff Sutherland. They basically rolled out this technique at J-Way and MySpace, and they got some pretty impressive results, like orders of magnitude improvements in velocity. So basically, the process imposes a number of non-negotiable rules. In particular, the banning of tools such as GreenHopper. So the motivation for these non-negotiable rules is this idea that most teams that do Scrum actually are really liberal in how they do it. And they're like, oh, we'll do this, yeah. Leading to this term, Scrum but. Like Scrum but we don't estimate or track velocity. Or Scrum but we actually only do stand-ups. So in the author's opinions, many actual Scrum teams aren't really doing Scrum. So, we're an adventurous group. We thought, let's try it out. We thought maybe we'll see some performance improvements, maybe not. But the big thing for us was that it'd be educational. We'd see what some teams, some enterprise waterfall teams who are rolling out Scrum, they're trying this process and how they're going to be seeing it. Thought maybe we'll be able to feed this back into GreenHopper. We'll get some good ideas. So before this, we'd been working as a Kanban team because at the time we were actually developing all these Kanban features in GreenHopper, so we were dog fooding. We were really enjoying it. We were having great productivity, and so just the immediately switching back to Scrum actually it felt like that had a cost in itself. On top of that, the rules imposed were really, really restrictive. Like, we're talking, so 1 week sprints was just mandated, you have to do this. Meant that we actually had a lot of trouble if we wanted to do big architectural changes or if we had really big stories, which we found that we did with some of these. Hey, we've got to build a cumulative flow diagram from scratch because it's a new code base. Estimation got really painful because the absolute converse of that, because Scrum Shock Therapy says you have to estimate ahead of time. So you go into planning meeting, estimation completed. We're doing conversely, lots of small issues. And so we're sitting down, discussing each of these three. In one 1 week sprint, we actually had 4 hours of pre-sprint planning, like estimation meetings. For a team used to using something like GreenHopper, switching to a physical cardwal was very painful for us. And finally, as far as I'm concerned, like, if a meeting can't be resolved in 30 minutes, 45 minutes, then you really should be taking it offline, discussing things over email or a page in Confluence, whatever, and then sort of having a small meeting to actually decide on things. The prospect of a 4-hour meeting every week shook my heart. So what did we find out? Well, even though I just complained about that 4-hour block meeting, we had some really productive retrospectives. We found things that were causing impediments that we didn't really think about because we had a big block of time and we really hashed things out. The Cardwall was actually interesting in some ways because it really changed the way that we communicated with each other. Like normally when we work, we have maybe 80% of our communication happens as comments on the issue in Jira GreenHopper. When we didn't have that as an option, we had to talk. Like you had to get up and talk to people, and it was kind of interesting because instead of shooting off an email or commenting on an issue, I'd see one of my colleagues walk up to the Cardwall to move something. I go, oh, I have to talk to him. I'll go and say hey, take this opportunity while he's already distracted, and we'll hash it out there then and there. So normally I'm actually a fervent advocate of this whole everything asynchronous all the time mentality. Some of you may have seen a talk that Zach Holman from GitHub did called How GitHub Uses GitHub to Develop GitHub, and he outlines this idea really well in that talk. I've got a reference to the slides if you want to have a look. Yeah, basically the idea is if something doesn't need an immediate response, just do it in an asynchronous manner, email, IM, whatever works for you, and let them respond in their own time without distracting. But that's about it, because cardwalls are really painful. We tried really sincerely to make it work for us, and it just caused so many issues. So why? Within Atlassian, working from home is just a fact of life. It just happens all the time. As an example of how much of a problem using a physical cardwall was, consider this. So this wasn't actually taken for posterity's sake as part of the experiment. I was trying to get an image for this slide and pinged one of my coworkers because I'm like, hey, you worked from home one day. Do you have that email that we sent through to you because you had no other way to understand what was happening in the sprint? So you can see the outlines here. This was comped together from 4 highly detailed images that we took and sent to him. This was the only option. We didn't have any way of collaborating. So, yep. Working with a cardwall, it's a problem. You lose Jira. I'm just going to guess that you guys understand this. Persistent search, linking, notifications. It's what makes Jira useful, and without it, it was pretty painful. Additionally, there's other integration points with your other tools and products that we just rely on, and you lose when you don't have when you're using a physical cardwall. So some of these were actually eventually recreated, but I kid you not, we were creating stories in GreenHopper with getting the issue key, and we'd write the issue key on the little post-it on the wall, and our Scrum Master would manually synchronize between them. So we had issue keys to commit against to get commit to issue linking. We could pre-fill those using various tools, and we had a GreenHopper reporting back. And up until this point, our Scrum Master was actually manually creating his burn downs like every day for us. So this cardwall issue actually really got to me. And the more I thought about it, the more I thought it actually represented something about Scrum that really just didn't sit right with me. So to explain, I'm going to talk about my colleague and dear friend, Alex. So he's a great developer. He's incredibly efficient, and he really is the absolute embodiment of this cartoon. Third time he gets asked to do something that he's done before, he'll automate it. If he's asked to do something, he's like, I think I'm going to have to do this again. I'm just going to automate up front. And I'm not talking about big things. He does it for big things. But even something as little as takes 5 seconds of his time, a couple of times a day. He's like, yeah, it's going to cost me. It's going to break my flow if I have to do this every now and then. So he just automates it. So why am I telling you this? Because before we started Scrum Shock Therapy, Alex had automated away all the parts of Scrum and really all the non-development parts of development that cost him time. So when we switched, his dev speed dropped, and it was frustrating for him, and I'm sure it was frustrating for all of us. So I really feel like all developers are like Alex. Perhaps not to the same extreme, but that's kind of what developers do. We automate. So to such people, agile can actually be seen as getting in the way of real work. Such people see non-automatable practices like manual card movements, manual report generations, needing to write an issue key on a post-it and putting it on your monitor so that you can actually hand type it in so that they see such things and they just think there's something wrong. And for Scrum to work, the whole team actually has to be invested in it. Everyone needs to estimate sincerely, and when they commit to a sprint, they have to be really committing to it, saying, we're going to do this. And if the developers feel like their time's being wasted, they're not going to stand for it. So as a curious aside, Alex actually is a big Scrum proponent. He sees the value of, you estimate and you track your velocity and you all commit to things and you have these retrospectives where you find out what made things not work. And he actually sees this as a sound return on investment for the very little cost that it has him. But with Scrum Shock Therapy, we had a massive increase in cost without an obvious increase in value. So So how many of you recognize this image? It's from a campaign launched by Zed Shaw, which rails against the very concept of software development methodologies. The campaign's call to action: we must destroy these methodologies that get in the way of programming, motherfucker. And in my opinion, a large part of the rage in this campaign is misdirected, and it throws the baby out with the bathwater. But unfortunately, this is irrelevant. As soon as developers start viewing Scrum or Agile in general as a hindrance, the damage is done. So by my reckoning, the popularity of this campaign could be seen as a side effect of people experiencing Scrum as we did in our Scrum Shock Therapy experiment, as a series of rules which put up roadblocks between you and getting shit done. And really, to avoid this perception, we need to justify what methodologies we impose and ensure that we have a whole team buy-in. Perhaps instead of booking a mandatory 4-hour meeting because you want good retrospectives, say, hey, here's why retrospectives are good. We should actually give ourselves enough time to really get value out of them. Devs aren't children and don't need to be treated like such. So just quickly returning to Scrum Shock Therapy, I want to reinforce, I'm not questioning what they achieved in their paper. Like, this talk was our experience as a team of one. We are very far from the intended users of Scrum Shock Therapy. We live and breathe Agile. And I fully imagine that doing it with a waterfall team, it's going to be completely different to our experience. But just a big takeaway for me was that if you have some rule which attempts to enforce some behavior, ask yourself if maybe you could get that by just kind of discussing it with the team and saying, hey, like, here's what I think's a problem, and we should work together to change it. It's just be direct. Thanks.